focus more on quality systems, but have done a variety, like I said, a variety of roles within quality. I'm also a adjunct instructor at St. Cloud State University here in Minnesota. We have a master's degree program in medical technology quality that I helped put together, and I teach 4 of the courses there. We've been doing that for 10 years now. Educationally, my background is mechanical engineering, although I never actually got to get that title in industry. So I think we sometimes how those things go. And then there's my certifications. Um, this was actually put together by myself and Etienne Nichols. Unfortunately, Etienne was not available tonight, so I'll be presenting this by myself. But Etienne has been around the industry for a while as well, mostly in medical device, but he's done other types of engineering work as well. He's also a mechanical engineer by education. He works for a company called Greenlight Guru, which produces EQMS software and provides a lot of education and events in the quality and particularly in the medical device space. So what we're going to talk about tonight, we'll start out just seeing if there's agreement on communication challenges that occur when you're in quality. And often this feeling of, why can't quality and just about anybody else seem to get on the same page? Then we'll talk about the basis for this topic. There's a book called The 5 Love Languages, and that's what this was based on. So we'll talk a little bit about that as the foundation for this. And then we'll take a look at my view of the 5 quality languages from that same kind of perspective of encouragement, face time, mentorship, collaboration, and empathy. And we'll talk a little bit more about each of those and how you might leverage them. So I hope a lot of these will sound very familiar to you. If you're in quality, you've probably dealt with this at times. You walk into an area, whether it's production area or anywhere else, and it's like the C's part. Everybody sees quality coming and they head in an opposite direction, right? Because the last thing anybody wants to do is find out what quality is thinking about today. We often get very frustrated. We're doing presentations to management and we bring them this great data. We do a lot of really good analysis. And it just seems like management doesn't ever connect to it. They don't seem to get the importance of what we're trying to tell them. And the reverse is I hear this a lot as I do consulting. Management talks a lot about quality, going, quality just doesn't seem to get what it takes to run a business. They're always off on doing these other kind of weird analyses, and it never has anything to do with running the business. So there's this disconnect there as well. And then this attitude, right? Whatever you do, don't ask quality. We can apologize later, right? After showing them what we did, and hopefully that it worked. And this just general impression of, right, why would anybody want to work in quality, right? That's got to be the worst place to be. So I hope that's somewhat sounds familiar, one or more of these. Like I said, I can't see all of you, but the last time I did this, I got a lot of nodding heads and laughter because it was definitely part of the role in quality I think we've all kind of gotten used to, unfortunately. So ultimately, I think we all understand quality tends to have an image problem, right? We're always seen as raining on the parade. We're always the bearer of bad news and why things, right? We're always telling everybody, well, that's a nice try, but you're looking at it the wrong way. You're using the wrong analysis or the wrong tools, right? Or none at all. Right? We're always, seem to be just, making it more difficult. And when we're asked questions, it seems like we can't do anything without coming up with a bunch of graphs and diagrams and data and all this stuff. Often we seem to be speaking as if we're coming from a completely different dictionary, right? Words that sound normal, and we seem to have a very different interpretation of what those words mean, which I think makes the communication gap even stronger. And then ultimately, it just seems like, God, when you talk to quality, they're just never satisfied, right? Just always want more, always continuous improvement kind of thinking, right? It's never enough. When will we get there? It's kind of the problem. So again, I hope that sounds familiar to people. So the problem with all of that, right, is that you can't fake empathy. And then we're going to talk about that, right, when we talk about the languages. If you fake caring, they're going to figure it out. Nobody will let that one pass. So You've got to really be truly caring, if you're going to be in quality and want to connect with people. You certainly can't lower your standards. Quality serves a very important role, and if you lower the standards, then you might as well just give up, right? And you kind of give up all the value of having a good, strong, quality culture and program in place. And for those of us who are in the regulated space, we have to be really careful about dropping the nukes, right? We know in our back pocket, there's always this regulation where we can go, look, I win. There's no choice here, right? FDA says, or FAA says, or whoever the regulatory body is, says you will do this. There's no debate. And that's never a good approach, right? That's just sort of beating everybody over the head. They'll just resent it. And again, it just creates that ongoing bad image of what quality does. And if you think you can just go it alone, fine. I don't need all the people that are involved in the process. Your chances of success go down considerably, right? So you can't really be that lone, voice. You're going to be seen more as a loose cannon, and you're not going to be able to create the impacts that you really need to create. So I didn't set up any polls there, but I suppose let's see. I know in Zoom you can give a thumbs up or wave your hand. Does any of that sound familiar to people? Is there similar ability here in WebEx for people to quickly say, "Yep, I get that"? You can even type it into the chat.
Yeah, there is a way to raise the hand. Yep.
So if we could just quick, if everybody would just kind of raise your hand if any of that sounded familiar or too familiar. Here they come. So it looks like a good majority of the people attending have definitely experienced some of this. Okay, so let's talk about the basis for this. It actually was Etienne, the other speaker that's not here, who kind of put the idea in my head. He does a lot of hosting of webcasts and those kind of things. And it wasn't one that I was doing, it was one I was attending. And he was talking to somebody else about a topic, and communication kind of came up. And Etienne, just off the top of his head, said, "Oh, yeah, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this book called The 5 Love Languages, but I sometimes wonder if there's 5 quality languages." And for me, the light bulb went on. I went, "Oh, there's definitely 5 different languages or more. I bet we could talk about this and figure this out based on the book." I had never actually read the book until that point, and I went out and bought a copy. So The 5 Love Languages was a book by Gary Chapman that he originally published in 1992. Got off to a slow start, but over time it became a New York Times bestseller, and it stayed on the NYT bestseller list for 4 years. And to date, there's 20 million copies that have been sold. So it's a pretty popular book. Gary was a pastor doing counseling for couples who were having challenges with their relationships. And in the book, he talks a lot about some of the stories, and some of them just sound like, you read them, you go, yeah, there'd be no hope for this couple. Divorce is the only way to go here. But what he found over time was some patterns. And he said it really often was not anything related to them not loving each other anymore. It's just that they weren't connecting. They weren't meeting each other's needs, right? Which would seem odd because some of them were together for a long time. How is it they didn't know each other very well? And the realization was, as he talked to each side, each person in the couple, was that, and he, says this is kind of common for all of us. We all tend to communicate and treat others in the ways we want to be communicated to, in the way we want to be treated. It's kind of like the golden rule, right? Except kind of inverted a little bit to say, well, of course, if I want to be treated that way, then that's how I'm going to treat others. If I want to have people communicate to me this way, then I'm going to communicate to others. But the problem is those needs, those languages are different for everybody. And so if your language doesn't match up with everybody else's or the other person that you really need to connect with, then the odds are good that you're not going to meet their needs, right? You're doing what you think you need. And if you assume that that's the same thing they want to hear or the same type of actions they want to see, then you can find yourself disconnecting very, very easily. And that was the basis for his book. I should say books, because he has done different versions of it. But what he came up with from his experiences was he saw 5 different languages, in how couples tended to interact. And it started with one was words of affirmation, right? So people who really want to hear the right things from their partners, quality time, you know, just spending good time, with their partners. Some people are motivated by receiving gifts, and that doesn't actually mean that that's not always diamonds and flowers and whatever car parts. It sometimes is just small things, is what he means by receiving gifts. Acts of service, right? Being there to help out with even again small things, big things, being supportive was the 4th language, and then sometimes just physical touch is what people are really craving, right? That physical connection between people. So that was what he started with. So my thought was, well, couldn't organizations be the same way, right? And therefore, is it not possible that it's not that no one else cares about quality, it's just that they don't care about quality in the same way that quality cares about quality. And that's kind of the disconnect, because we're not speaking the same languages at the same time. And this idea that everyone might have a different idea then of how quality should work because of that. So that was where I came up. I thought about what Etienne said, right? Could there be 5 quality languages? Yes, I think there are. And this is what I came up with. If I match the 5 love languages and look for an equivalent in the quality culture, where Chapman talks about words of affirmation, I thought that sounded more like being more encouraging. Again, I'm going to go in a little more detail on each of these. Right? I talked about we're always seen as raining on the parade, never being satisfied. Right? So, is there an opportunity, a language? Maybe that's what the other side is looking to hear from us, is at least something positive. That says we're on the right track. Quality time. Well, that one seemed pretty obvious because it's got the word quality in it. But I thought, well, let's not be too easy about this. What would be the equivalent? And I think FaceTime. And we'll talk about getting more engaged with the people that we're trying to impact and trying to be part of what we're doing. For receiving gifts, I'm not espousing that anybody go out there and try to bribe your organization to get them to do what quality wants them to do. So to me, I think the big gift that we have to offer is mentorship in quality concepts, right? Is helping, trying to become the educator and making them turn into the next set of educators and so on, and continue that down the line. Now, I will say, again, monetary gifts that should be completely off the table. I do find that candy is a really good motivator. I used to do that when I was the head of quality at various companies, as I was known for having a candy jar on the corner of my desk close to the door. And it was amazing how much that encouraged people to finally walk into my office instead of avoiding it, that candy was a magnet for them. And then where Chapman talks about acts of service, to me, this is where collaboration comes in, the need to really create a team effort, right? If you're trying to create a quality culture, you can't do that around one organization. You've got to engage everybody. So we'll talk more about that. And then physical touch, obviously we don't want to go there. Nobody wants to get into the, getting called down to HR because we're a little too touchy-feely. So I turned that one around and said, let's go the opposite way and go with empathy as the equivalent of creating some sort of an emotional connection there rather than physical touch. So let's start with number 1, encouragement. Okay, right? And again, it's that idea of let's stop always being the one who rains on the parade. Can we shift our approach from always being, there to point out what's wrong to remembering to celebrate first what's right? Let's start with that in mind. Also, this idea of not trying to eat the elephant in one big bite, right? The old adage is, right, how to eat an elephant, you take one bite at a time. And I think sometimes in quality, we forget that we're looking for the revolution and we forget about the evolutionary approach. Small victories are good, right? That evolution versus revolution. I often talk about this, right? If you had an organization of 50 people, what would be better? All 50 people working towards 1 or 2 big improvements, or everybody working towards 50 small improvements? I'll go with the 50 small improvements, and I've done that and I've seen that work really well because they'll add up to something big. You might still need some big, obviously, you need to have some big initiatives off to the side, but it's sometimes tough for people to engage in these really big initiatives, and understand what their role is. But if they understand what their piece is, and even if they've had the opportunity to define that small improvement, that can create a lot of really good change and improvement in your organization. We need to remember to celebrate every victory. Now, this doesn't mean you throw a pizza party because somebody remembered to sign their paperwork, but that acknowledgement, doing something that tells them, yes, I noticed that, I saw that. I've done, things, as simple as grabbing a piece of candy out of the candy jar when somebody comes in and gives me good news, going, here, you earned this, right? Or just telling them, yeah, you have the right, take something out of the candy jar. Those little things do go a long way. But you should also have the bigger parties, right? Or the bigger celebrations. Was there a question?
The internet problems that are always.
Oh, I think somebody just has their mic on. I see Charles has still got his hand up. Charles, did you have a question?
No, I was just acknowledging your agreement with some of your comments earlier.
Okay. Great. Okay.
Let me remove. There we go.
No problem. I thought those go down by themselves after a while, but so anyway, remember to just point out what's good, whether it's a big celebration or something, small token. If you do that, if you focus first on the things that are working, the positivity aspect, that buys you credibility and the ability then to deliver bad news when you need to talk about serious issues or problem areas. They'll hear you better, right? If they know you're not always claiming the sky is falling, that they recognize, hey, yeah, our quality organization does acknowledge what we're doing right. So when they show up and say that there's something that's a concern, we probably should listen, right? They start to be able to hear you because now they trust you. But I think we often forget that, right? I'm going to talk about this later, about not always being on the hunt whenever we show up. So let's get into that, right? FaceTime. Let's not always be that SWAT team, right? And we only tend to show up when there's a problem. That's when the seas part and everybody heads in the opposite direction. If any of you do audits, I've been in audits like that before, where the moment we walk into a room, I did this once at a manufacturing facility, and we walked into a particular production area, and people literally left the area. They did not want to be there while we were auditing. Right? That's not where you want to be. And we were coming in as external auditors. We weren't even part of the quality team, but the quality team obviously was escorting us. And that told us a lot about what was going on in the quality culture, right? So we don't want to create that kind of situation. Everybody's probably heard of this concept of Gemba walks, right? Walking the floor, walking the building every day is really, really useful, right? Getting people to see you outside your office. As I've said, they're not likely to come to you unless they really have to come to you, right? We need to remember as quality to get out there, right? And let people see who we are. And the idea is you're not just passing through. You want to stop. You want to talk. You want to meet people. You're creating connections. That's really what communication is all about. You want to be inquisitive, but not investigative. This is not your opportunity to do an audit every day, but just to understand. Hey, I'm great. Hey, I walk by here and I see you working this machine. So what do you do? What does this make? What kind of parts are you making? Right? How long you been here? You like this? What do you think? Just start those normal conversations. And it can be very quick, right? They got work to do. You got work to do. You do a little bit of that every day. You start to build on that over time. Again, you're building up that credibility and that trust, which then will enable you to move to the harder questions when you need to, right? Because now they know you have a basis for it. You've taken time to understand them, and they know who you are, right? You're not just some stranger. They go, oh yeah, that's right. That guy's quality is what I've heard. And besides the just walking around, whoever your stakeholders are, make sure you set up time with them for one-on-ones. I mean, these can be 10, 15-minute meetings. They can be impromptu, right? Of course, people are busy, so sometimes it's good to just get something on the calendar once a month, once every 2 weeks, with process owners, department managers, subject matter experts, people are key influencers, right? The people that everybody else listens to. I've just found this produces really good results. I used to have, one of my roles, I had to travel around the multiple facilities. And, if I was only there for 4 days, I just made sure I spent a good part of my time just setting up 15-minute meetings with all of the department managers just one-on-one, even if it was just to talk about, their hobbies or whatever. But I could tell they really appreciated that I was taking the time to create the communications, and over time that let them kind of loosen up and share things that they maybe needed help with. If you've not heard of this concept before, there is this approach called appreciative inquiry. It's actually got its basis in psychology. I actually use it when I'm doing auditing, which is where you start with asking people to talk about things that are going well. Right? If you do audits or you've been in audits, right, and we're very used to going, all right, where's the problem area, right? Let's look at the project or the process that we know is failing and start there. If instead you said, all right, I want to walk through an entire product development process. Let's pick one that you did recently that went really well. Okay. People will go, oh, great. They like to talk about that. They will loosen up. You say, just, yeah, tell me how it went. Where did it go so well? What were the things that worked really well? And what you find again is you're building up that trust. And at times you can watch for certain, keywords will pop out, because at times they'll do things, right? We'll talk to, one group that's in the process, right? And they'll talk about, yeah, and then it goes from here, and then we deliver this to engineering or something like that. And I ask, all right, so how do you do that? And, well, we give them requirements documents, whatever, right? And then when you meet with the next group in the process, the engineering group, and they say, oh, I understand this project went really, yeah, we did really, really good. We created some really good features, and then you start to go. So, tell me more about how you got the requirements, right? Oh, well, those came down from, upstream marketing, and they give us requirements documents and all this stuff. You go, so how did that go? Apparently it must have worked really well. And they go, yeah, it did work really well. It could probably be better. There's some refinements or some requirements that, they weren't really written well. And now you've got your opportunity to go, so tell me about that, right? Without digging, you've already uncovered something that maybe is an opportunity, whether it's just a opportunity for improvement or an actual non-conformance, but they offered it up now, right? They didn't clam up because the first thing he did was going, well, I know this project was a failure, so we're going to look at that and dive deep. And then they get really quiet and defensive about all those things. So look up those words, appreciative inquiry. There was a really good article, oh boy, probably 10 years ago in Quality Progress magazine, ASQ's magazine, about somebody applying appreciative inquiry to auditing. And that's where I started trying it out, and I found it works really well. Number 3 in the languages is mentorship. Okay. We know this stuff really well, and you've always got to be careful of assuming then it's obvious to everybody else as well. So don't assume that everyone knows what to do or will understand, even understand when you explain that they get the language in which you're explaining it. Understanding the problem, the lingo, the tools, the goals, why it should even be important to them. None of that may be clear, or at least pieces of it may not be clear, and it creates this incomplete picture for them. And then they get nervous, or they just check out, and they don't really engage in the way you're looking for. Your opportunity is to educate, right? We tend to do training. We know there's got to be a training management process. And we train, which is follow this work instruction. Step 1 is do this. Step 2 is this. Step 3 is this, right? We do a lot of that training rather than explaining the why. Right? So why has it got to be this way? Why is it in this order? Why do we use these tools? Why do we use this approach? You build that context for people, then they get the concepts. You focus on that. Once they understand the concepts, the methods then become a lot easier to teach and a lot easier for them to comprehend. So you've always got to do that shift in your mindset from training to education first. Then you'll get the opportunity to train. And again, as you're looking for where those opportunities are to educate, it's always better to build on people's strengths or organization's strengths rather than going, well, we have to fix this weakness. That can sometimes be very frustrating. I don't know if anybody's familiar with these 2 books. You might be familiar with something called the Strengths Finder. A lot of people have taken that survey to find out what their 5 strengths are. The Strengths Finder was based on these 2 books. You can see Marcus Buckingham is the common author between the 2. First, Break All the Rules, and Now Discover Your Strengths. And both of these books are about stop trying to fix people and instead leverage what they're already naturally good at and make them even better at that, right? if they've got a weakness, stop trying to force them to do that. Maybe go find somebody else for whom that's a strength. And I think we need to do that with organizations as well, instead of just beating our heads against the wall because we can't seem to get this work cell or this department to do exactly what we need. Maybe it's because they're just naturally inclined to do that well. And so we should not look for them to do it. What is it they do really well that can benefit us in the quality system? Focus on that for them. And then go figure out who's the right group or person or team that can take on the other thing that this group is weak at, right? And move it around to where it really belongs. And always be looking to create the next mentor, right? When you're educating someone, you're teaching, whether it's a person, whether it's a group, you want to put it in a way that they can then turn around and teach it to somebody else, right? And continue that on down the chain. I picked this quote. There's a lot of them like this, right? To teach is to learn twice. And they always talk about that the best way you can learn something is to try to explain it to somebody else, to teach to them. As a teacher myself, I find that to be very true. My students expect me to know everything. They expect that I am the expert, and I have to be really good about not disappointing them. So it keeps me very sharp that I have to go in every week and teach them something that I generally know, but sometimes, right, we know we don't do everything in quality all the time. And there are things we're better at or we like better within quality. The more we figure out how would we explain it to somebody else, the better we tend to understand it. And if we can encourage them to share that with other people on their team, right, create that next mentor, just starts creating a stronger and stronger quality environment there. All right, so I'm just doing a quick time check, so make sure I'm watching that. So number 4 language is about collaboration. Oh, I got on the wrong screen now. All right, there we go. This is kind of similar where I talk about not raining on the parade, right? We always have to avoid that perception that we come in and do something to the target area, right? That, oh, here comes quality. They're going to make us do something, right? So the way to get around that, it does kind of have its foundation in some of the other languages, right? Where you maybe use a different language, right? In order to build that trust and to create that engagement, right? Because then they start to see you not necessarily as an outsider coming to do something to them, but as a partner. And I think I've got that coming up on some slides, right? That you become part of the team, or at least somebody more trusted, right? Even if you only show up, periodically. Again, you shouldn't be doing that. You should be there pretty regularly, but they have trust in you, and so now they feel like you're making them part of the effort. Anytime we love to do all kinds of analyses. Great. I'm not saying don't do analyses. You want to do it, but don't forget to involve those who know the most about what you're analyzing. Right? Now, this should be good advice all by itself. Forget all the different languages. I hope everybody understands you can't stand back on your own and try to analyze something you're not directly part of because you think you know better. But we have to be careful of that. I see a lot of that in engineers, in quality professionals, regulatory people as well. We tend to think because we're so serious, and professional about it, that the others aren't going to understand enough to help us. And I think that's a really bad attitude. You've got to get into that mindset of, yes, before I make any assumptions, before I come up with a hypothesis, I really should talk to the people who are doing the work, who understand this process really well, because it might completely change the direction of where I thought it might need to go or be going at the time. The other value, right? If you involve the people who are part of the process that you're looking to make improvements in, now they have a sense of ownership of the process anyway, but now you help them start to develop a sense of ownership of the change. Right? They also feel like they've got a voice. And this is good advice. I don't have it on the slide here. This is good advice whether you're trying to influence downward, sideways, or up. Especially up. I found this works really well. We tend to, when we're trying to influence management, we tend to try to perfect our message. Right? Get ready for whatever the big meeting is we're going to present, and then we go, and then we're surprised when they don't hear us correctly. And I found that actually works really well to get ahead of that and start meeting with management before the big reveal, and engage them in developing the idea so that by the time you do the actual presentation, you've got several of them, if not all of the people that are going to be in the room, already on your side, and they feel like, wow, that was my idea. you're just presenting what I told you, even though you probably massaged it, but through that early communication, you got them to be part of that. And I've actually had this happen a couple of times where I've been butting my head against the wall with a particular person in a leadership position, and then change the approach to involve them early on. By the time I had to present to that person plus a bunch of others, now they're my cheerleader in the room, and the other leaders are more open to hearing it because one of their own is saying, yes, this is the right idea, we're heading in the right direction. But again, you want to make sure you don't just run in there and go, we have a problem when we're here to fix it, because that immediately creates that defensiveness. It creates fear. They don't understand yet where you're going, and then they can't hear you. And ultimately, what we're trying to do with all of this, not just with collaboration, but I talked about it before, we want to create a perception that quality is a partner that they can't do without. They absolutely want us in the room, right? Get away from that early thing where I said was, don't tell quality what we're about to do. To, yeah, we need to get quality in here because they'll really help us come up with the right solution, right? They'll be good, good team members for this. They're not always raining on our parade now. That's where you're trying to get to as much as possible. And then our fifth language of empathy. So another book I like, I don't know if anybody's read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. It's another self-help book that was written a long time ago. Stephen passed away a while ago, but it's another book that's been on the bestseller list like forever. Time magazine called it one of the 5 best business books ever written. Anyway, it's a really good book. It's what it sounds like, right? That being effective, requires really good habits. And one of those habits, is seek first to understand, then to be understood. I always liked that one. That one kind of resonated with me. And we're all smart people, so we tend to think we know the right answers. And sometimes we're bold enough to be the first one to speak, right? And then we're surprised by the pushback. And you got to learn to, listen. My mother, right, bless her soul, was her version of this was, ears open, mouth shut. Is what she wanted to see at the dinner table. And she was a teacher as well, and I think she wanted the same thing in her classroom, frankly. But I think this is the right way to approach, and it makes sense to first understand what's going on. Make sure you kind of get to test your hypotheses by listening before you start offering up your opinions. Now, I think if you look at this one, right, there's some obvious connections again and foundations in the other languages. So I think if you look at some of these, they play well together, and maybe you start in your mind thinking there might be a pattern to which ones I might try first because they might lead me in the direction of being able to leverage some of the other languages, or at least uncovering what people are looking for. So I talked about this before about, right, as quality, we tend to have with dogs, they refer to as a high prey drive. We're wired to go find those opportunities, to find what needs to be fixed or improved. You need to be able to turn that off, right? I know it's hard because you're probably in quality because you're good at that. But turn on the ears, shut your mouth, and stop thinking about what am I trying to investigate. Right? It was back to I said earlier about being inquisitive before you get investigative. And the same thing applies here. Turn off that prey drive that I've got to go find that target and something to fix versus I just need to understand what's going on, right? And that might change what the target should be because of what I hear and what I learn. And again, we tend not to be directly involved in the things we're supposed to make better. You need to get better at that, right? Take a walk in their shoes. If you have the opportunity, can you go get trained to do some of the operations on the factory floor? Do it for a few hours, a couple of days, whatever, right? And just get trained and see what is it like when they have to assemble this stuff, right, or produce these parts. What does it take to actually do that? Now, in some cases, they have very specialized skills, right, to run certain machines or to do very, detailed kind of work. I worked at a medical device company that made artificial heart valves. There were tissue valves. And my understanding was that the people who sewed the tissue valve onto the metal ring that they went onto, they practiced for 6 months before they were allowed to produce anything that was going to go out for sale. you need to respect that, right? So understand that, okay, so they're probably not going to let you go down and sew up a couple of heart valves. Maybe they will, but they probably won't. That should be a message back going, you know what? There's something going on there that if I'm not allowed to do it, then I should respect the fact that it takes very special people to do that. And I need to figure out a way to go learn what is it that they're special at, right? You've got to open yourself up to that and go, I don't know what I'm talking about here. I can't because nobody else is allowed to do this except them. So how else can I learn, right? And therefore be able to empathize with what their challenges are. All right, so how do we make this happen? So as it often comes out with quality, because we touch everything, right, in the organization, quality's challenge is that it needs not only to be aware of all 5 languages, but you're going to have to be fluent in all of them. It's the same way I was just a couple of weeks ago, I saw an article and it was talking about some of the challenges in quality leadership, and it just had this typical diagram. Quality is in the middle, and every other function is often around quality, and quality is connected to all of them. The same thing happens in these languages. Because we have to talk to everybody and understand them and work with them, it's not going to be good to figure out what is the languages that you're good at, or the one language that might work for a certain organization, but you're probably going to have to be ready to try all of them out. The key is, though, for each person, area, organization that you're working with, you do need to find out which language is the one that's important to them. Right? In Chapman's book, he suggests there's always a top 2, right? The 5 languages, kind of like the 5 strength finders. There's always a top 2. And he said that's what you need to figure out is those, because those are the ones to really focus on. Those are the ones that are going to resonate most. Everybody probably speaks all 5 of the languages, whether it's love languages or quality languages, but there's always going to be 2 that override the others. If you get the love languages book, there's a place you can go online. You can take the survey, and then they'll tell you, right, the priorities of your 5, and they show you percentages, and you can see the top 2 are usually far and away bigger than the other 3 are to you individually. So you need to be able to do that and find out, how to get there, and which are the 2 languages that are going to be most important or most impactful for whoever it is you're trying to be better communicator. However, as they often say, right, change begins with the person in the mirror. So quality needs to change its habits first. Okay. You see this a lot in Chapman's book, that is, he's dealing with these couples and trying to help them through their relationship problems. That more often than not, he didn't really say this directly, but you could see it in every story. That eventually he had to focus on one of them, figure out which one was more open to the change in the approach, and get them to go first. And through that, that would start to change things for the other person, who could now then appreciate it and then was open to making changes their own. Quality, we've got to be the guys, the people that do this, right, and do it first, right? It's always, right, you demonstrate the habits you want to see out of others. So we've got to show we're open to talking in different ways, communicating different ways. I do think language number 2, if you don't know for sure at all, then language number 2 is probably the best place to start. That FaceTime, doing the walks, getting to know people, getting to know what they're doing, because that's how you learn, right? Okay, maybe that isn't the best, one of their strongest languages, but it will at least help you see what the most important language is likely to be within that area or that organization. And then, as results start to come in, you start to see some improvement. Then you get to share what you need, right? Either as an individual quality professional or your quality organization. What is the language, the 2 languages that quality wants? But as I talked about before, what Chapman saw in couples, one of them had to go first, right? Before they could start saying, here's what I need. Let me give you what you need first. Then I'll talk about my needs. Quality has to be the same way. We have to be ready to be the starter of this. Let's go out and understand, what does everybody else need? Then they'll be able to hear us say, what do we need? All right, so wrapping this up, some of the key takeaways I hope you picked up on here. It should be clear. Don't assume everyone else thinks or needs, right, the same as you do or your organization does in quality. You need to see it in a lot of different levels of granularity, right? It could apply to individuals, could apply to organizations. You'll figure out, and this will probably change over time, right? Who are your focus areas. Sometimes you've got to influence one person. Sometimes you realize you got to influence an entire organization, big and small. So you just need to understand that, and every time you do it with a different individual, a different organization, you're going to probably have to start again to make sure you understand first, right? What do they really need versus what do I need? There's no way to do this from afar. That's why I said I think the FaceTime language is the first one to try out and see if that gets you what you need. You've got to get engaged directly with people. I know that's a lot harder, has been for the last few years with everything being remote, but there are ways to do it. You can get online and they'll tell you ways to better engage with people, across WebEx and Zoom and all that stuff, and doing all the stuff remotely. There are tools and tricks and tips for doing that. But if you're back in the environment of being back, physically around people, right? Nothing is ever better than just directly engaging with the people you're trying to understand better. As I said, be prepared. Quality's got to be good at all of these things, as is often the case with what we do in quality, right? I often talk to my students about, right, not having a single tool. That old saying of, if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. We know in quality we have lots of different quality tools. Hopefully you carry a big toolbox. The languages are part of that, right? You can't just go, all right, here's the one language I feel really good about applying. You are going to have to be aware of all five and be prepared to speak all five at different times or all at the same time, possibly. And again, don't turn this into an analytical exercise. I was sitting through not sitting through, I attended a really good talk at this conference I was at week before last, and it was all about quality tools and data. And at the end, though, the speaker made the point going, don't forget your intuition. It can be just as valuable as all that data. And the same thing here. We're talking about soft skills here. So I don't want to get emails from people going, Steve, I figured it out. I put together this great spreadsheet and I've added 5-point scales to every one of the languages and a survey that I can give to people. And then I can do a statistical analysis and put that in Minitab and it'll tell me exactly which language is the right one to apply. That's missing the point. Okay. Don't go down that path. I understand that's how we do a lot of things in quality. This is when we got to turn that off and go, we're just trying to be people here. Use your soft skills, go with your heart, your intuition, and just listen and get to know people really well. All right, that leaves us, it looks like 15 minutes for questions. So what can I answer? What people have stories, similar stories they want to, share about what's worked for them. That's always good as well.
Yeah, I do have one, Steve, FaceTime. I think that's one of the one that resonated with me. I try to do that, just go to the floor, talk to people, and not quality related, right? About something else. And then little by little, they get to know you and then they trust you. And then they start sharing other quality or work related quality issues, right? First they have to trust you. So that really resonated with me. Thank you.
Great.
Everybody else, just unmute your microphones and feel free to ask the question, comments.
Has anybody tried anything like this before? Whether it worked or not. That would be interesting to hear. If you have tried any of these, which ones worked well and which ones maybe didn't.
Yeah, you make an interesting point, right? It's the analogy between love and quality, right? So don't just try it quality, right? Try it in your real life.
Well, there is that too. The book is really good when I read it, I have to admit. So, but I'm not here selling the book. Okay, come on. We had people raise their hands saying a lot of this started to resonate with them.
Oh, there is a comment in the chat box. It says, any special thoughts or advice for a relationship where I am already the customer partnering with a supplier? It's a question.
Okay. Just trying to think what the dynamics are here, right? Where you're the customer. You know, what came to mind when I read your question was kind of the difference between supplier management and supplier development. The supplier management, I think, is the typical approach we use, right? Where we get very analytical. We have our, we measure the supplier, we give them their scorecards or whatever, and we tell them when they've screwed up. Where supplier development is taking that and start to understanding how can we help them get better at it, right? And have them see us not just as the customer who pays the bills, but as you noted, becoming that partner. And so I think, that's part of it is how often do you communicate with that supplier? Does it only happen, through purchase orders and scorecards, right? Or SCARs, you send them a supplier corrective action request. So there you are, right? There's quality again, always bringing bad news. Or particularly for your more critical suppliers, do you create an ongoing relationship with them so that you're always talking to your quality counterpart there on some sort of regular basis, right? Again, even if it's just to catch up on, vacations or something like that, to create that trust so that they'll want to share with you things that they're finding challenging, and that gives you the opportunity to talk about things that you need to see better. Cynthia, does that answer your question? Does that help? John, we'll get to yours next.
There is another comment from John Scardina. Educate rather than train. Brilliant analogy. What more insight could add to this?
Yeah, well, as I talked about, well, so thank you for saying it's a brilliant analogy. That's always nice. This comes up a lot when I'm doing various training sessions on quality system concepts. There's I don't know what industry everybody's in, or John, which one you're in. With FDA in the 820 regulation that we apply for good manufacturing practices, there is a reference to that part of management's responsibility is to ensure that you have appropriate resources, and somewhere in the sentence it says that are educated, trained, and aware. And I always turn around to my students and go, so why does it say educate and train as two separate words in that sentence? Right? Because if they're synonyms, then that would be redundant wording. So there's clearly got to be a difference in getting people to think about, okay, have we even defined that in our quality system? Because everybody's got a training management SOP. Does anybody have an education SOP? Probably not. The better organizations, I think I've occasionally seen where education is covered somewhat in the training management procedure, or if they've decided to add a resource management procedure, which talks about how HR does what it does in hiring, that maybe then you get into the education. But I think, again, it's that softer skill piece. The training is about, like I said, the specifics, the step by step. But if you do that without any context, right? If somebody tried to train me on how to close the books every month without my having any sort of accounting, education, it's not going to come out very well. I don't care how well they write out the procedure for me. I'm probably going to make a bunch of mistakes that are going to be pretty critical because I don't have the education to understand the context within which I'm going to perform those steps. And unfortunately, I think that's what too often companies do in their training process is they only focus on the steps without the context to it. All right, let's see what we got from Aaron. So he said, your point about people not wanting at first to come to your office resonated. The go and see approach puts you into their environment where the other person tends to be more comfortable. Yeah, I mean, that's part of it, right? Where are they going to be more comfortable? Stepping into your office, especially, I don't know how your office set up. If you're in a cube, it's a little less threatening, but if you have that kind of, what they call it, the power office setup, right? Your desk faces the door and they're always going to stand on the other side of the desk. And sometimes you have to think about little things like that. How did you lay out your office in terms of who you're visiting today? But yeah, again, getting out there, there's no substitution for getting out there. When I did this talk a couple weeks ago, somebody offered up a really good example of what they did is in order to encourage people to take that walk, they moved the vending machines to the other side of the plant from where the office space was. So the people in the offices had to walk through the plant if they wanted to go get a Coke, right, or a candy bar. Now they're just wandering through, but it gives them that opportunity to see what's going on and be seen. And I thought that was a good way to get it started, right? I teach another workshop that I call Guerrilla Tactics for quality leadership, and I talk about a concept within that called hide the vegetables. And to me, putting the vending machines on the other side of the plant is a form of hiding the vegetables. People start doing essentially what could become a Gemba walk without realizing that that's what it is and being told that that's what it is. Let's see. And we tend to forget to tell others the why behind the requirements. Yeah, it's easy, right? The what. We always start with the what, right? Step one, step two. I think we get into that because a lot of times quality tends to start to a great degree in manufacturing, which of course is very sequence oriented, and so we just get into that mindset of work instruction rather than process. And again, if you're taking on the concept of process thinking, you should be able to take that step back and go, yeah, I need to see the bigger picture here, right? The work instruction is down to the details. Before I get there, maybe I should have started in the broader perspective, right, and see the process and then work my way down rather than work bottom up. Good points.
Okay, anyone else? Any other comments, questions? I think you...
Good presentation.
Thank you. And I know the slides will be made available. I don't know if they were already sent out, but I know they will be made available.
Yes, the slides will be sent by email along with the RU receipt, the recertification units receipt. Is usually by this weekend, Monday the latest. That's what we have been doing lately. Steve, I think you cover all the comments and questions. There are still some comments coming. Very good presentation.
Thank you. And if you think of anything, you can certainly contact me by email or by phone. I'm always open to talking further about this. Other book recommendations. So let's see. I had the two by Marcus Buckingham. I love Marcus Buckingham. Those two books are really easy reads. And I learned a ton by reading those two books about, strengths. His first book, First Break All the Rules, I tend to have that sort of heretical approach to things. That's why I do another course, like I said, called Guerrilla Tactics. So that title, First Break All the Rules, was me. But he does it in a way you don't lose your job, right? That's the thing. So I love those two books. I do think Covey's book, The 7 Habits, is really good. There's training available on that too. I'm not saying you have to do the training. The book is relatively straightforward. Other books that I think are really good. This one's going to seem a little more specific, but right, the old adage is that engineers are not very good writers. I think that kind of sometimes carries over to quality people. If you want to improve your writing skills, a book called The Elements of Style, for me, completely changed how I write and how I do presentations and things like that. So I recommend it. It's a book that's been around, again, for decades. It's gone through several revisions over the years. The authors are like long dead, but it's, again, an easy to read book on grammar, which sounds like an odd thing. But actually, one of the authors is E.B. White. If you're a fan of the book Charlotte's Web, he's the author of E.B. White, of Charlotte's Web. But then he talks about good practices for writing. So I think that's a good one to get as well.
Okay, I think those are all the comments. Jacob, I see you have a question for me. I'm gonna send that by email. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Steve. I just have 2 final comments. Keep an eye on our community page for any future events. And we do have some leadership positions open available. So if you're interested, if you can contact me, send me an email, please. Okay, Steve, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Have a good night.